Going into last season, Texas A&M had high expectations. They were a preseason top 10 team. They were coming off of signing the best recruiting class of all time. But everything went wrong in week 2 when they were upset by Appalachian State. In what was the biggest shocker, perhaps the biggest shocker, of the college football season. And after that, it was a nearly complete disaster. They did salvage some wins against Miami and Arkansas. But after that, a 6-game losing streak. They did have a positive end of the year by upsetting LSU and spoiling any hope LSU had of making the college football playoff to finish their year 5-7. Jimbo Fisher comes into 2023 on the hot seat because if A&M has another 5-7 season, I am 95% confident that Jimbo Fisher is going to be bought out. It doesn't matter what the buyout is. If you're only going to win 10 games in 2 seasons with the talent that you have to move on. The 5% that I'm not so certain of, that's probably the fact that they have been recruiting really well, especially in this offseason, as there's been a lot of hype for the 2024 class. But I will say 95% chance if A&M goes 5-7 again this season, you got to at least consider buying out Jimbo at the very least. But as I've already mentioned, I'm 95% certain Jimbo gets bought out if they go 5-7. They hired Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator, one of the best minds in college football. And hopefully, Jimbo Fisher just lets Bobby Petrino cook, as we've seen how disastrous Jimbo Fisher's offense is. I don't know what the deal is. Does Jimbo Fisher, does he think he's still at Florida State? Does he still think he's in the ACC? I don't know. But the offense he runs, it expired post Jameis Winston days. So it's at least a decade old. And it's so 2012, 2013-ish. But there is quite a bit of hype for A&M going into 2023. And as much as I don't want to jinx A&M, they have the right to think that, as they are returning 15 starters from 2022, which I believe is the most in the SEC. And out of the 15 returning starters, that includes 6 of the top 7 tacklers from 2022. Which, despite DJ Durkin being the defensive coordinator still, and I really felt like they need to put DJ Durkin on the hot seat as well. There's been talks about how some people think that they could be a top 15 to 20 defense in college football. Reasonable. You got 6 of your top 7 tacklers returning. And I like the pickup of Tony Grimes in the transfer portal. I think Tony Grimes is going to have a really stellar season for A&M. Also, the top 3 receivers are returning from 2022. Evan Stewart, Moose Muhammad III, and Anaya Smith is back for one more season. Unfortunately, Anaya Smith missed most of the year due to injury. But he's back for one final season. Mr. Versatility. And 4 of the 5 starting offensive linemen from 2022 are back in 2023. So the offensive line should hopefully be improved. Even though Connor Wigman did not start in week 1 last season. When he was the starting quarterback, I felt like A&M's offense, it was conducted better when Haynes King or Max Johnson was under center. I didn't feel like the offense gelled as much as when Connor was under center. Despite only completing 55% of his passes as a starter last season for A&M, Connor Wigman, he threw for 896 yards, 8 touchdowns. But the thing I like the most, 0 interceptions. So I do think that Connor Wigman is going to get some hype going into 2023 if he hasn't already. I mean, he could be a really long shot for the Heisman Trophy. I mean, if he plays clean, if he limits the turnovers, which we've seen in his limited action from 2022, he's capable of doing so. So let's get to the schedule for Texas A&M. Their 2023 campaign begins September 2nd at home against New Mexico. Next week, September 9th at Miami, the Hurricanes, by the way. September 16th at home against Louisiana Monroe. September 23rd at home against Auburn. September 30th, a neutral site game at AT&T Stadium, Jerry World against Arkansas. October 7th, they host Alabama. October 14th, on the road at Tennessee. October 28th, coming off of the bye week, at home against South Carolina. November 4th, at Ole Miss. November 11th, Mississippi State. November 18th, Senior Day, Abilene Christian University. And November 25th, to conclude their regular season, at LSU. So can they make it to a bowl game with this schedule? Now, I have every single game in one of 4 categories that I have written down here, which you can't see. Definite wins, 50-50 toss-ups, definite losses, and leaning towards a win. New Mexico, I have that as a definite win. At Miami, the Hurricanes, again, for the record, I have that as a 50-50 game. Now, I imagine that the sports books and the odds makers, they're going to have A&M as possibly a touchdown favorite, despite it being a road game. But I do think both teams in this game are going to be well improved from 2022. And we saw this matchup take place last season where A&M won in a very low-scoring game, 17-9. Well, I think there'll be a lot more scoring in this matchup, which is why I had that as 50-50. Louisiana Monroe, I have that as a win. But I do want to address, before I go any further, that game on September 9th on the road at Miami, that is going to be a huge tell as to how the rest of the year will go for A&M. If they win that game, then they're going to have confidence going into SEC play. But if they lose, then I think it's the beginning of another disappointing season for the Aggies. ULM, a definite win. Louisiana Monroe. Auburn, I have that as 50-50, as well as Arkansas. For Auburn, we truly don't know how Auburn is going to look this season. I feel like Auburn is either going to be close to a 10-win team or a very disappointing 5-win team. I feel like there's no in between with Auburn. They hired Hugh Freeze in the offseason. And I feel like that game has potential of being a very low-scoring game as well. So I have that as 50-50 for now, but we'll see what happens in the first handful of weeks of the year going into that game. Arkansas, that's 50-50 because every time those two square off, more often than not, it's a close game, a hard-fought game, a battle from start to finish. So that's unknown for me right now. Alabama, I have that as a definite loss. If the Alabama game was on September 9th instead of on the road at Miami, I feel like A&M would have a chance to pull off that upset, a very strong chance. With Alabama having their new personnel, their new players. As Alabama, they do have quarterback questions going into the year, as does many teams towards the top in the preseason rankings, at least we expect to have a lot of teams that have quarterback questions really high in the preseason rankings. I think by then Alabama is going to be fully gelled and they're going to be connected. But if that was close to September, week 2, sort of say, for example, I think A&M would have a chance to pull off a massive upset there. But I think Nick Saban will have his team ready to go for that matchup. At Tennessee, I have that as a definite loss. I am sold on Tennessee having another strong season. I do not think Tennessee will be a one-season wonder. I'm sold on Tennessee going into 2023. At home against South Carolina, I have that as a leaning win for multiple reasons. One, it's in College Station this time. And two, they're coming off of the bye week. And I think that's really going to help them out here. So a leaning win against South Carolina. At Ole Miss, I have that as a definite loss. I just think with this game being on the road, I feel like that is going to be a loss. Even if Ole Miss isn't at where we expect them to be going to this game, it feels like every single year there's always one or two games where we don't expect A&M to lose, but they'll lose anyway. Ideally, I think that's the kind of game. Like, let's just say, for example, A&M only has one loss going to this game, and it's against Alabama. I feel like that is a trap game for them in that situation. Mississippi State, I have that as a leaning win, even though Mississippi State, they have given A&M fits in the past. Abilene Christian, definite win. And at LSU, I think it's a definite loss with the game being in Baton Rouge this time. Plus, I think LSU is going to have a good season once again. And I think LSU, I feel like they could be a relative sleeper to win the national championship, believe it or not. Which, that's probably a potential spoiler for a future video. But that is all I have for A&M this season. After looking at things, I feel like it's either going to be a strong, at least strong to, compared to last season, 8 wins, which that's pretty disappointing for a team like A&M standards, but it's an improvement from 2022. Or 5-7 again, and they ask questions. Is Jimbo Fisher worth keeping around? Is it worth paying the massive buyout? But that is all I have. Comment your thoughts down below in the comment section if you'd like. And until next time.